Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Done well. 1 second, please. Yeah, let me set up my screen. 1 quick second. So we're ready to start?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today evening. Let me share the screen with all of you and we'll start our discussion for today evening. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. So thank you all for joining us for today evening in this program of Gita Essence, which is an overview of Bhagavad Gita and which is based on the teachings of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And today we'll be doing the review of the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. So I hope all of you have attended previous sessions, because today I would be a little swifter or maybe a little more quicker than what I had been in the previous sessions. To give you a summary of 6 chapters was a task for myself to think, how do I present it? So in case if somebody has joined for the first time, you'll have to deal with it. You might miss out understanding a few things. So Bhagavad Gita, to talk about the structure of Bhagavad Gita, just to introduce the subject, is divided into 3 divisions. Chapter 1 to 6 is what we call as Karma Yoga section, is what we have just discussed. Then chapter number 7 to 12 is called as Bhakti Yoga, which we are going to start from tomorrow. And chapter number 13 to 18, the last section of Bhagavad Gita, Yoga. So this first section of Bhagavad Gita, which we have just completed last weekend, Karma Yoga, where we learned that how Lord Shri Krishna explained the word yoga means is to connect with the Supreme Lord, the union between the jiva and the absolute truth, or the Supreme Consciousness, or the Supreme Lord. And there are different levels or different types of yogas, which we'll be discussing in this session today again. And in this first part of the discussion, Lord Shri Krishna elucidates or explains Arjuna that Karma Yoga is the easiest path. Karma Yoga is the beginning of the ladder of the yoga process, where we dovetail our propensities. By dovetailing our propensities, we engage ourselves in the service of the Lord. So in this path of Karma Yoga, nobody has to accept some very severe austerities or regulations, nor he has to take the path of renunciation. Rather, he has to continue performing his duties, but with a different consciousness, with a different understanding. And that perspective and that understanding is described in the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. Then comes a later section, which is Bhakti Yoga, where Lord Shri Krishna, this section primarily focuses on where Lord Shri Krishna speaks about himself. Who is he? What are his opulences? Because to follow any process, to practice any path, what is the most essential thing for it? I believe the chat is enabled, so we can interact with that. If you want to do anything in your life, or you want to follow any path, what is that one very essential component? If that component is not there, you cannot do it. What is that? Yes, correct. Faith. And faith depends on knowledge. Faith comes from knowledge. So Lord Shri Krishna, from chapter number 7 to chapter number 12, the middle part of Bhagavad Gita, would elaborate about the knowledge of the absolute truth. He will speak about some profound secrets about the creation, about the existence of this whole universe and the universe beyond this universe, that is spiritual world. So that is Bhakti Yoga section, which culminates at that the supreme absolute truth, the supreme personality of Godhead, can only be understood by bhakti, not by the process of jnana, not by the process of some austerities. Only one thing by which we can understand Supreme Lord, the Absolute Truth, is through the process of bhakti. Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga is non-different. They're one and the same. But there's a slight difference in that context. We will discuss that when we talk about the yoga later again. And the last part, chapter number 13 to 18, is a Jnana Yoga. Now, this final sixth chapter focuses on Jnana, that is called transcendental wisdom, or Jnana Yoga in that sense, which helps one become detached from materialistic aspirations and simultaneously attached to Krishna. Therefore, this section, the last six chapters, does not discusses any new concept. The concepts have been already elaborated by Lord Shri Krishna, have already been introduced in the previous chapters. However, the last sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is very, very interesting, here Krishna would explore already described subject matters in the previous chapters in a more analytical way, which helps those who have a scientific mindset. They want logic, they want reasoning, and they want to understand how this creation happened and everything. Lord Shri Krishna presents that subject matter. And those who have that bent, the scientific bent or intellectual bent, for them, it's a very interesting and an entertaining discussion in that sense. So that's the overall structure of Bhagavad Gita. And today, as I said, we'll be doing the review or the overview of the first six chapters, which forms a part of Karma Yoga. So let's quickly begin our discussion from chapter 1, where the acronym for chapter 1 was doubt. D standing for the Dhritarashtra Duryodhana, and this is in front of all of you. I'm not going to go into details of it. But let me just speak something about doubt. It's a very interesting word, doubt. Whenever we are faced with doubts in our life, you all would agree, there is always a sense of uncertainty and confusion. However, that's what the chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita begins with, where Arjuna is doubtful, bewildered. However, just we'll see in the case of what happened with Arjuna, the doubt can also bring us to the start of our spiritual journey. To put it precisely, in fact, spiritual journey usually starts with a doubt. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Jigyasa means inquiry. Inquiry means there's a doubt. That's how you're going to make an inquiry, isn't it? Atato Brahma Jigyasa means, who am I? What is this creation? What is the purpose of my life? What is life and death? Why people suffer? So these are the doubts which forms the basis of spiritual journey. To give you an example, generally it is seen that our friends, family, society, and the media around us, they paint a picture of they paint a perfect picture of a successful life. And we subsequently shape our lives in determined pursuance of that picture that is given to us of a successful life. But I believe all of us would agree at certain point of time in our life, we begin to doubt whether that perfect life or the successful life is really achievable, which means the world today, the education, the society, the media teaches us, if you have a lot of wealth, possessions, name, fame, recognition, you are a successful person. And that's how the college student or the student in a school at the college, he lived his life thinking that if I graduate, this is what I'm going to get in the world out there and I'll be happy. But when the reality dawns on an individual, when he realizes and understands, well, these things never ever make a person happy. The more you have, the more you want to have. So it's an unending cycle. And this is the point of time where a person begins to question the materialistic goals, the perfect picture which was offered to us, the aspirations and the milestones of success that have become deeply ingrained within us. Therefore, at this point of time, individuals begin to think, is there a possibility of deeper purpose of life? And this is a very similar doubt that Arjuna expresses in chapter 1. And this is how the sacred conversation between Lord Shri Krishna and Arjuna begins. Arjuna is thinking, will becoming a king give me a true happiness? If for that I have to kill all my friends and relatives, is this what life is all about? And this is how chapter 1 begins, and this is what is the essence of chapter 1, where Arjuna is bewildered. Where is he thinking? What is the purpose of life? If for me to become truly successful, to be the king, I have to kill my relatives? No, that cannot be true happiness. There has to be something else. So in essence, chapter 1 talks about Arjuna's bewilderment and explains how Arjuna became doubtful about the purpose of life, wherein an apparent negative situation faced by Arjuna, by the grace and the wisdom of Lord Shri Krishna, through this Bhagavad Gita, turned into a most positive outcome. And this is the message of Bhagavad Gita, or you can call it, this is what is Bhagavad Gita. To turn challenges, to turn obstacles into an opportunity is what Bhagavad Gita teaches us. And this guidance and wisdom of Lord Shri Krishna is available to each one of us through the compassion of Guru Parampara. That helps us to find meaning and purpose in our own lives, and that is to reconnect oneself or to re-establish one's forgotten relationship with Supreme Personality of Godhead. With this doubt in his mind, should I fight or should I go to the forest? Well, Arjuna has kind of made his mind that he wants to go to the forest. And with this, chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita begins. Chapter 2, very interesting chapter of the whole Bhagavad Gita, titled as Contents of the Gita Summarized, offers a concise overview of the entire philosophy. Okay, pay attention. The whole overview of 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita in itself is given in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. On top of it, we are doing the overview of first 6 chapters, okay? So here in this chapter, we see that how Arjuna, although he has made his decision that he wants to go to the forest, yet he is torn, yet he is bewildered. He decides to humble himself. And this mood of humility and desperation, he approaches Krishna and he speaks to Lord Shri Krishna as follows. Please guide me, my dear Lord. Karpanyadosho pahata swabhava rachami tvam dharma samudha chetaha yashreyasya nishchitam bruhi tanme Shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. Here Arjuna acknowledges his weakness. He says, my dear Lord, it's just all because of my fault. My weakness of heart, I am not able to make the decision. I give up. I give up what? I give up my faith on myself, on my abilities, because I cannot make decision. I don't know what is right for me, to fight or to go to the forest. Shishyas teyam sadhimam tvam prapannam. Therefore, I surrender unto you. I take your shelter. My dear Lord, please guide me. And this surrender of Arjuna prompted Lord Shri Krishna to present Bhagavad Gita. Please make note of this point. This humble disposition of Arjuna, this spirit of surrender of Arjuna, prompted Krishna to present Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. So we cannot understand Bhagavad Gita unless we approach Bhagavad Gita, the message of Lord Shri Krishna, similarly in the mood of humility that Arjuna expressed. This is not similar to blind following. No, Arjuna is not doing blind following. There is a question and answer format where he's going to bring back his doubts again and again and clarify. And Lord Shri Krishna encourages Arjuna to ask questions. But there is a way of approaching or asking or putting forward an inquiry. We will discuss that also, which is described in chapter 4. But if somebody wants to understand Bhagavad Gita, he cannot understand Bhagavad Gita if he wants to approach Bhagavad Gita in a scholarly format. He can only understand Bhagavad Gita when he understands the need of the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, where he feels the desperation that I need help of the Lord. And my dear Lord, I am willing to take your shelter, just like Arjuna did. And if we do so, then Krishna would also speak to all of us, just like Lord Shri Krishna spoke to Arjuna. For us, he will speak through the pages of Bhagavad Gita, through the purpose of Srila Prabhupada. So in this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna precisely brings out three very, very important and significant subject matters, which I would say sums up the whole Vedic philosophy that we have. And the very first subject matter which Krishna discusses here is the fundamental aspect of spiritual wisdom, which means what is the foundation of our life? Is it the spirit from which the life comes, or is it the chemical that gives life? Second aspect, what is a practical application of this spiritual knowledge? The foundation of spiritual knowledge is to understand I'm not the body but spirit. Then how do I live with that knowledge? And the third, what are the symptoms of those who have understood this knowledge of self-realization? And I just forgot I had a quiz here. So before we proceed ahead, we'll look into the acronym of this chapter. But however, let's have a quick poll with all of you. So let's see if you remember what was the acronym that we had discussed. So all of you see a question in front of your screen. So please go ahead. Let's mark your answer. What is an acronym for chapter 2? You will have to be a little quick, okay? Because otherwise we'll run out of time for this session today. So I can't proceed ahead because if I go ahead, it's the acronym next. So I'll give you a few more seconds to fill out your answers. Let's see what we have to say. What's the acronym? Okay, so we'll end the polling. We'll proceed ahead. And this is what maximum of you have said. You said 69% of you have said is Gita. All right, let's see what is an acronym. Yes, the acronym for chapter 2 is indeed Gita, where G stands for Guru. Arjuna was determined not to fight, but simultaneously he was confused. And we all have had that experience in our life, at times where we are totally helpless. When I was thinking on the subject matter, a few instances came into my mind, particularly when you have to choose your branch of study. Should I go for engineering? Should I go for medicine? That phase for students is very, very confusing. How many of you agree? I believe all of you are above that age group. It's a very troubling time. Should I take a biology? Should I take a physics, chemistry, maths, PCM, as they call it? And let's say even if you get an admission, no, not admission. When you apply for engineering colleges, then there's a big doubt, which engineering college should I take an admission? And if you get an admission, then the next big challenge is, what should I study? Computer science? Mechanical engineering? And ultimately, the idea is whatever will give me the maximum salary is what people choose for. I'll just give you an example. Like this, our journey continues on with situations where we feel totally helpless. So these are my experiences. But I heard from some people, some other people about their experiences where they said, Prabhuji, all these challenges are okay. Nothing is as greater a challenge when you have to find a spouse for yourself. That is the biggest challenge the person goes through to whom to get married. So those who have got married is their experiences that they have shared. But nonetheless, we all have the experience of it. So here we see Arjuna submits himself to Krishna, tells Krishna to guide him. The point is, most things in our life, like I gave some examples to all of you, requires guidance and instructions under a qualified teacher. And the spiritual discipline is no different. And in this section, Arjuna, from his own personal example, teaches us some valuable lessons. Lesson one: unless we acknowledge our weakness, until then we cannot accept guidance. Which means, unless you feel, unless you recognize you are sick, you're not going to go to the doctor and follow the prescription. So, this first step of recognition of one's own strength and weakness is very important. Until then, we cannot accept guidance, and until then, we cannot overcome our weaknesses. So think about Arjuna. Despite being touted as the best bowman in the world, it must have taken a lot of courage and humility for Arjuna to admit the weakness of heart. Yes or no? To tell Krishna, where Krishna is not recognized as the best bowman in the world, it is Arjuna who is known as the best bowman in the world. Now, that Arjuna is speaking to Krishna and saying that I have a weakness, that requires a lot of humility. Unfortunately, we live in a time where humility is considered to be a weakness. No, that's not the reality. In fact, the truth is, to be progressive in life, it is essential to cultivate humility, because humility protects us from being falsely proud of our accomplishments and strengths, which otherwise can prove futile in another situation or environment. As I said before, similarly, without humility, we cannot understand the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita. It doesn't matter you're a single PhD, double PhD, or triple PhD. I don't know how many of you know the acronym for PhD. The more you are educated, particularly PhDs, PhD stands for permanently head damage. The person becomes so proud that have accomplished such a great feat, people cannot understand the message of Bhagavad Gita. So for us, the very first thing here Bhagavad Gita teaches us that we should become Arjuna. Be an Arjuna. What does being an Arjuna means? Be accomplished like Arjuna and also be humble like Arjuna. Don't be like Duryodhan. What is Duryodhan? Be accomplished, be proud. That is Duryodhan. And what is Arjuna? Be accomplished and be humble. And we saw, because of this quality of Arjuna, Arjuna was victorious and Duryodhan lost everything. And the third lesson, that we have already discussed these, I'm just highlighting some very key concepts here in our overview. The fundamental step in spirituality is to accept a guru who comes in an authentic lineage of spiritual teachers and who has mastered the spiritual art. And that's the whole point. To learn anything to learn anything on the path of spirituality, we need to approach a guru. We need to find a guru, a bona fide guru. However, sometimes people argue here. They say, well, why do I need a guru? Bhagavad Gita says that Supreme Personality of Godhead resides in the heart of every living entity. Sarvasya chaham hridhi sannivishto. These are the words of Lord Shri Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, which means in your heart, my heart, and the heart of every living entity, Krishna resides as Paramatma. So some people say, when I already have a Lord within my heart, why should I follow somebody else? But they don't understand. Although we may have Lord in our heart, but to access Him, we require help to reawaken our pure inner consciousness. Until then, we cannot understand what Paramatma is trying to tell us. As the saying goes, one who accepts himself as a guru accepts a fool for a disciple. The message is clear. I don't need to give you a purport for that. So hereafter, when Arjuna have surrendered, Lord Shri Krishna responded to his appeal for shelter and began to speak on the basics of spiritual foundation. And that brings us to the second section of chapter 2, which is titled as Identity, which refers to who am I? Am I this Mayank Agarwal? I'm this male, I'm an Indian, I'm a Hindu, I'm so and so, I'm a human being, whatnot. Who am I? Am I this body? Am I something more than that? Well, according to modern science, Dr. Harry Monson, professor of anatomy from Illinois College of Medicine, he said almost 60-pound person, which means almost an 80 kg person, has this proportion of chemicals. So according to the modern science, which consider a human being just a mere bundle of chemicals, the cost of this proportion of chemical for a 60-pound person is not more than 120 rupees in Indian market. So is the science trying to tell us, trying to teach us that we are valueless? We're just 100 rupees worth. Well, that's not the fact. Maybe that's the reason people these days don't take life seriously. They don't understand the value of the human form of life. And people are wasting their life in things like drugs, alcohol, and whatnot, which are all deadly. So, what does Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita? Krishna tells, well, our existence is on three levels. First, what we can perceive, what we understand very easily is called as gross body. This body, which is made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether. Second, which is most subtle, difficult to recognize, is mind, false ego, intelligence. It's not difficult to recognize. We all know we have a mind, we know intelligence, we understand through the symptoms. Subtle because we cannot see it, we cannot directly perceive it. And more subtler than that is soul. And that is our true nature. And the subtle body and gross body is like a covering on the soul, on our true nature or existence. So our situation in this world is like that of a parrot in a cage. Although living within the cage, which means although living within the body, we are simultaneously different from this body. We are temporarily operating it to perform activities, fulfill desires, and interact with the world around us. Until we realize our true identity as spirit soul, we undergo the process of transmigration or reincarnation. And we face subsequent sufferings and distresses of life in this material world. Therefore, Lord Shri Krishna tells us through the means of Bhagavad Gita how to break the cycle of suffering, how to break the cycle of transmigration and attain to the eternal life. And in this section, that's the point is brought about that we are not the body but spirit soul. It is the body that dies, it's a body that takes birth. Soul is eternal. Najayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavitva na bhuya ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. So after understanding this, that I'm not the body but a spirit soul, I'm eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. However, I'm covered over. I have forgotten my true identity because of the association of the matter. So person may ask, how does this knowledge practically affect our day-to-day life? Knowledge of soul. In other words, if I'm an eternal spirit soul, then what I'm supposed to do in my day-to-day life? How my tomorrow looks different than today? Am I going to do something else tomorrow because I've understood I'm not the body but spirit? And for that, Lord Shri Krishna explains yes. And that is the third section of chapter 2, where Krishna explains there are two duties, not one. And what are the two duties? For those who understand we are different than the body or who want to understand that we are the spirit soul, there are two duties to be performed. And two essential duties of dharmas of a living entity are called as Sanatan Dharma and Swadharma. Sanatana Dharma refers to our eternal spiritual duty, which comprises of one's relationship with the Lord and all living entities. And this duty is expressed through the process of hearing about the Lord, like all of us are hearing the message of Lord Bhagavad Gita, hearing about the Lord, chanting his holy names, and serving the Lord. That is Sanatana Dharma. Whereas Swadharma refers to your occupational and worldly duties, which consist of responsibility towards family, friends, and societies. And the most progressive path is to be alert to both the duties. If we can consciously find a balance between both Swadharma and Sanatana Dharma, that's the way to lead a happy and a balanced life. So when Arjuna heard this, Arjuna began to think about it, and he pondered that what would be the result for someone who performs such duties with determination and enthusiasm, who lives a life by glorifying the Lord, performing his Sanatana Dharma, and also doing his occupational duties properly. What is the result? And Krishna says, such a person becomes Atmaram. What is the meaning of Atmaram? Such a person finds pleasure within the self. And that is the last section of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, where where there's a discussion about the characteristics and the qualities of Atmaram, wherein Krishna explains the essence of the subject matter is that how Atmaram is unaffected by the dualities of this world, such as happiness, distress, gain, loss, honor, dishonor. Krishna explains that such a person, a practitioner who has performed his both the dharmas, gradually rids himself of qualities such as raga, bhaya, krodha, and he finds joy within self. And that is what is defined as a success of life. So when Arjuna heard this, he reflected on Lord's instruction. He was quite amazed with the wisdom that was shared. Because this is what was troubling Arjuna. Arjuna was confused what he's supposed to do. And on top of it, he was caught up into the dualities, honor, dishonor, and so forth. So when Arjuna heard this, he felt like, yes, my dear Lord, I want to become Atmaram. Who wouldn't want to become an Atmaram? If let's say you're given an opportunity or you are asked, would you like to become an Atmaram? The way Krishna explains is very clear that that's what everyone would like to be, freed from all kinds of hankering and desperation, and just be happy all the time. So when Arjuna heard it, he was excited. He wants to become Atmaram. Thus, Arjuna was confused. How do I become Atmaram? By renouncing or by fighting? Oh my God, I am confused. Thus, Arjuna asked his doubt to Krishna, and this marks the beginning of chapter 3. My dear Lord, what do I do? Which is better for me, to fight or to renounce? This brings us to the chapter 3, and this brings me to a question to all of you is, what is an acronym for chapter 3? The question goes for all of you on your screen now. Please take maybe 25 seconds to answer. This helps me to know that you are making some notes or else you remember something. All right. Some of you are taking time. Fine. We'll continue. We'll share the results. So most of you, almost 77% people have got it right. Correct. The acronym for chapter 3. And while others, they have marked options, looks like they're just attempting something. Or maybe they're confused. All right. The acronym for chapter 3 is TREE, where T stands for Tyaga. Now, what is this Tyaga, or what is this subject matter? The first 9 verses of chapter 3. Here, Lord Shri Krishna responds to Arjuna's inquiry about what is better for him, to renounce or to work. Here, Lord Shri Krishna establishes the proper meaning of the word renunciation or Tyaga. Renunciation is not about giving up one's occupational duties, giving up family responsibilities, or renunciation doesn't mean that you have accepted a saffron attire or a robes. Krishna says renunciation is of our desires for sense gratification. Because what belongs to us? We all came empty handed, yes or no? Did any one of you came along with your degrees or a bank balance from previous life? And all of us would go empty handed, right or no? We may work as hard we want. We may acquire as many positions. At the end of the day, when we have to leave, we leave empty handed. So, what is belonging to us? Even the body is not ours. It's like a rented house. When you sign an agreement for a rented house, there is a lease period given, 3-year agreement. And when the agreement is over, then the owner says, get out. Similarly, we have signed an agreement with this body. We are a rented person. We are not the owner of the body. We come, acquire this body for some time. Some may have a tenure of 100 years, 80 years, lease agreement, whatever you call it. Some may have it for 20, 25 years. And when that agreement expires, that is what we technically call in our language as death. Do you agree? Do you acknowledge? Do you see this point? At least logically, do you see this? That this is a rented property. This is not our ownership. We don't possess it. If we possessed it, then we should have been allowed to keep it with us forever. So that's the point Lord Krishna said, nothing belongs to you. So this renunciation cannot be attained by falsely accepting the dress of renunciates, while simultaneously meditating on sense objects. So here Krishna says the way you can cultivate renunciation is through the process of performing karma yoga. So the main theme in this particular section is that Bhagavad Gita is not about leaving. Bhagavad Gita is about living. And Lord Shri Krishna explains what is karma yoga. Karma yoga is to perform our duties in a spirit of detachment, wherein one offers the results of one's daily work, that could be one's money, prestige, knowledge, influence, to the Supreme Lord. In essence, Karma Yoga can be described in 2 words: detached and dutiful. Performing one's duty in the spirit of detachment. What does spirit of detachment mean? Detachment from selfish interest. That is detachment. And what is dutiful? To perform our duties as a service to the Lord, to please the Lord. And that is what means dutiful. In essence, if we perform our occupational duties in this manner of detached and dutiful, then that work becomes yoga. That is a process of self-realization. Arjuna was impressed when he heard this most practical and doable approach, an easy approach to attain self-realization. However, Arjuna thought that to work without selfish motivation is undoubtedly an advanced stage of spiritual realization. And not everyone can qualify for it. So then Arjuna asked, my dear Lord, what about those people who cannot perform karma yoga? How can they advance? And then Lord Shri Krishna begins to speak. That is the second section of chapter 3, rungs on the yoga ladder, where Lord Shri Krishna describes this whole yoga process starting from karma kanda. Karma kanda means where a person follows religious principles, dharma. Through that, he acquires his artha. Through that, he fulfills his kama. And finally, he comes to a conclusion understanding that kama can never be satisfied. So through religious means, when he practices his life, then it brings the person to religiosity and gradually makes spiritual life as a goal. Then a person qualifies to the next stage of karma yoga. So karma yoga, when a person primarily engages his senses in the service of the Lord, where the sense is the means of connecting with the Supreme Lord. That is called as Karma Yoga. What is Jnana Yoga? Where the mental faculty is primarily used, which means study of scriptures for long hours. That is called as Jnana Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga, where a meditation is given prime importance. Where Hatha Yoga, Pranayama, these kind of processes are given prime importance. That becomes Ashtanga Yoga. And what is Bhakti Yoga? Where we use everything, prana, artha, dhiya, vacha, everything given to us in the service of the Lord, that becomes Bhakti Yoga. So Arjuna said, oh, that sounds fantastic, my dear Lord. And I have a good news to tell you. Krishna said, yes, what is that? Arjuna said, my dear Lord, I have no worldly desires and aspirations. And I already know I'm not the body. So why should I do Karma Yoga? I qualify for Jnana Yoga. So why don't I go to the forest? Krishna said, hey, you clever boy. You're still attached to your idea of giving up your duty. I'll tell you the reason why you should not give up your duty, Arjuna, because you're not an ordinary person. You are the brother of the future king. You're the son of a Pandu. You are a leader. And your prime responsibility is to set an example. And that brings us to the third section in chapter 3, where Lord Krishna advises Arjuna to perform his duty for the sake of educating the people in general. Why? Yadyadachrati shreshtas tattadev tarojana sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. Set an example. Whatever a great man performs, everyone follows behind. When Arjuna heard this, he said, oh, really? My dear Lord, then why don't I set an example of renunciation? So can I go to the forest now? Lord said, hey, wait a second, man. You're too attached to the idea of going to the forest. And the Lord Shri Krishna said, hey, Arjuna, most people are not qualified to follow the example of renunciation. If an unqualified person follows your example, which means a person who has a lot of material desires, and he follows your example of renunciation, although you may be qualified to live a life of renunciate, but because he is not qualified, he will eventually try to fulfill his desires through irresponsible means. Arjuna understood and he acknowledged. And now Arjuna was inspired and determined to perform his duty. But then suddenly Arjuna had a thought. And Arjuna said, my dear Lord, the experience of this world teaches us that it becomes very difficult to sustain determination and enthusiasm after some time. Although I may decide I would do it, but after some time, I fail to continue to have the same determination. Even though I know the best course of action, but what is that impels me time and again to act improperly and against my good intelligence? And there, Lord Shri Krishna begins the last section of chapter 3, titled as E, Enemy of the Soul. There is one thing that paralyzes our spiritual life, and that one thing is called as lust, which Krishna describes as eternal enemy. It is never satisfied and it burns like fire. And we had an elaborate discussion on this in our chapter 3 when we had discussed about it. So the question arises, which Arjuna is thinking, my dear Lord, I'm really scared about this lust. Lust refers to unfulfilled desires. You are correct. How much ever you try, it is never satisfied. Even if you get something, then it wants more. And if you don't get anything, you become angry. Both the way you are a loser. My dear Lord, how can we defeat the lust? And the Lord Shri Krishna gives 3-step approach to defeat the lust. The very first thing of defeating an enemy the very first thing for defeating an enemy is we need to know the location. So Lord Shri Krishna establishes the strategic location or the hideouts of this lust, which is sense, mind, and intelligence. How many of you remember the case study of 15th August that I had given in this section? Please say yes or no on the group. If you were there for that particular program, when I discussed chapter 3, you remember the 15th August example? Okay. So Arjuna said, okay, my dear Lord, now I know where the enemy is. What do I do? The Lord Shri Krishna said, well, now you know where the enemy is. Now you have to deal with the enemy. Your enemy is sitting at senses, mind, and intelligence, and you have to very carefully deal with it. So, what is the first thing we can control between intelligence, mind, and senses? Lord Shri Krishna says the easiest is to control the urges of the senses, than that of the mind and intelligence. For example, you can make a conscious effort what to see or not to see. Yes or no? However, if your mind has already decided to do something, then it is almost out of our hands. That's the whole point. Krishna says to control your knowledge acquiring senses, regulate your knowledge acquiring senses. And the third step is to acquire knowledge, transcendental knowledge. Krishna recommends cultivating spiritual intelligence as intelligence is superior to mind, mind is superior to senses. So if intelligence is properly directed, then it can easily steady the mind and regulate the senses. So here Lord Shri Krishna glorifies spiritual knowledge and recommends Arjuna to cultivate it to overcome lust. Thus, in chapter 4, Lord Shri Krishna elaborates and speaks what is transcendental knowledge and how to receive it. So here I have another question for all of you. Results were shared already, right? And stop sharing result, okay? Is what is the acronym for chapter 4? And here's another quick question. In the meantime, when you're giving up your inputs, I might need 15 minutes more to conclude the last 3 chapters. So I have 10 minutes more to go. So I hope you all are fine to stay up to 7:15. You can use your chat box to give me a confirmation. Okay. So by 7:15, we'll conclude this thing. Okay, great. Most of you looks like have given your votes. Who had to give the votes? So here is the result. Yes. So most of you are again correct. Thank you for that. Indeed, the acronym for chapter 4 is PAST, where P stands for position of Krishna. Here, Krishna explains how this eternal educational system was originally set up by him, the system of transcendental knowledge. He explains that the system perpetuated in the universe through qualified and saintly persons who imparted the spiritual knowledge to the masses in a dynamic and a relevant manner. Thus, this material creation is essentially a university wherein we discover our relationship with the Supreme Lord. However, as a creator and maintainer, Krishna periodically appears in the world to re-inject spirituality. Wherever the disciplic line is broken, then Krishna appears again to establish the Guru Parampara or disciplic succession and to remove the materialistic influences and to ensure the smooth functioning of the universe by establishing spiritual knowledge. So, what is spiritual knowledge all about? 3 things. It's all about 3 things. First, knowledge about the self, who am I, knowledge about the Supreme Lord and his opulences, and the third, knowledge of one's relationship with the Supreme Lord. In this section, Lord Shri Krishna only gives a pep talk about himself, his activities, and his opulences. Whereas tomorrow, chapter 7, where we'll discuss, and from chapter 7 to chapter 12, Lord Shri Krishna is going to speak in details about himself and his opulences. And like this, the first section of chapter 4 concludes, and it brings us to the second section of chapter 4, is how to apply transcendental knowledge. Or not how to apply, what is the result of applying transcendental knowledge? Just like we all have an experience, most people know something about religion, something about God, but I believe all of you would agree their understanding is often hazy and unclear. However, when transcendental knowledge is received through this eternal educational system, one gains an accurate understanding. And in the next three verses, 11, 12, 13, Lord Shri Krishna clarifies three major misconceptions, which we had a detailed discussion when we discussed chapter 4. And the three major misconceptions people have. First, that all paths lead to the same destination. Krishna says, no. Ye yatha mam prapadante tam sateva bhajamiham. I reciprocate according to your surrender as you approach me. Not that anyone can do anything and all will get the same result, not at all. Second, a common misnomer where people consider all devatas to be one. They're all one. Durga, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu, Narad, Indra, Surya, whatever, they're all one. They all are devatas. However, Lord Shri Krishna in 4th chapter, 12th verse establishes the monotheistic ideology, which means there is one supreme Lord. And the third is the caste system unfair and exploitative. Chaturvarnyam maya shrashtam guna karma vibhagasha. So here Lord Shri Krishna says, no, I have established this varnashram dharma, which is not based on faith, which unfortunately today our division of society is based on faith and the status. However, the spiritual division of society, according to Vedic scriptures, was not based on faith or status, was based on one's propensities, was based according to one's work. And that's how people lived happily without much discrimination. It's unfortunately in Kali Yuga, things degraded, and that's how this whole system got spoiled. So while spiritual knowledge helps one to clear up certain philosophical or all philosophical doubt, it also helps us to clear up our karmic bank balance. And that brings us to a discussion on karma. What is karma? Karma is a universal law of nature where every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And it is of three kinds: vikarma, akarma, karma, and vikarma. What is vikarma? Vikarma refers to bad activities, sinful activities. If somebody engages in those sinful activities, it results into sinful reactions, a painful suffering. And what are those prominent sinful activities? Meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit relationship. What is karma? That is vikarma. What is karma? Karma refers to pious activities. So when you perform good deed, you get a good result. And what is the result? Heavenly situation, which means name, fame, wealth, and high birth, and maybe a birth in the heavenly planets in the next life. What is a karma? We got vikarma and karma. What is a karma? Beyond this good and bad activities performed on the spiritual level, that is action which yields no reaction, and in fact ultimately frees one from the anxieties of entanglement to this world, such an action is called as akarma. And to perform this akarma, spiritual knowledge is required. Thus, Arjuna began to think how to understand and realize transcendental knowledge. And that brings us to the third section of chapter 4, is sacrifice. Sacrifice refers to yajna, which helps to refine one's character, which makes one eligible to achieve this knowledge. When it comes to material education, it depends on your competence. Whereas when spiritual knowledge comes into the picture, it depends on one's character. So in this section, Lord Shri Krishna explains various sacrifices for different performers. So then Arjuna began to think, what is the best sacrifice for me? How do I know, my dear Lord, what sacrifice I'm supposed to do? And that brings us to the last section of chapter 4, where Lord Shri Krishna speaks about the T, process of transcendental knowledge, where Lord Shri Krishna explains one of the biggest sacrifice is to relinquish one's pride by humbly submitting oneself before the bona fide Guru. Therefore, Lord Shri Krishna explains the process of acquiring spiritual knowledge. One of the most important verses of Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidhi pranipatina pariprashnena sevaya updekshanti te jnanam jnanina sattvadarshinaha. That knowledge of different sacrifices, vidhi, one knows. Pranipatena is submissive. Pariprashnena, inquiry, spiritual inquiry. Pranipatena means submissive, not challenging. Pariprashnena is spiritual inquiry. Sevaya, by faithful service. Upadekshanti. Upadekshanti means he will initiate you. Te jnanam in knowledge. Nani na tattvadarshina, the one who knows the tattva. If you approach him with submissive attitude and a service attitude, he would initiate you in this transcendental knowledge, and then you will know the whole truth. That's how Lord Shri Krishna explains about the subject matter. And here, Lord Shri Krishna glorifies jnana or transcendental knowledge. However, when Arjuna heard all this, he got confused. And he began to think, if I'm supposed to cultivate jnana, then why is Lord asking me to fight? I should renounce, isn't it? And it's a very common doubt amongst those who are spiritual minded. They think, in other words, if I am supposed to practice spirituality, then I should take renunciation. So the problem here with the mindset of Arjuna at this point of time is he had not understood that work done in Krishna consciousness is greater than sitting in a solitude and performing tapasya. Engaging oneself properly in Krishna consciousness yields far greater results and is an easy process. Thus, with this doubt, because Arjuna is still not clear, our chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita begins, wherein again the fundamental question is, should I renounce or should I do work? My dear Lord, I'm not very clear. So that brings us to another poll fall here, and that is, what is the acronym for chapter 5? I believe all of you can see the question on your screen. Yes. You don't have to type in the acronym. You please do the acronym here. Select on the poll. And take a few seconds more. Because if we can remember these acronyms, we have a good, at least theoretical understanding of the contents of Bhagavad Gita. And in case of doubt arises, we know where to go. So great, thank you once again. Most of you have answered correctly. Yes, the acronym for chapter 5 is STEP. Wherein in this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna will further explain Karma Yoga in details, where the acronym STEP, S, stands for stay in the world. In other words, in this section, Lord Shri Krishna describes about the life. In other words, he explains how to live our life in this world so that we don't become entangled in the material complexities, wherein we create further or future births in the material world. So here Krishna speaks about Karma Yoga, but more in depth, and explains how it is an easy and effective process to attain self-realization. Arjuna doubts were cleared. He got convinced when Krishna very clearly explained to him what Karma Yoga is and how it is the best process for him. Then Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, how to perform Karma Yoga? And then Krishna explains 3 points. First, keep mind and senses under control. Act without attachment. Attachment means without attachment, cultivate detachment. So engage your results in the service of the Lord. And lastly, be very clear. The goal of your work is to purify yourself, is not to enjoy the results of your work. If you're very clear with this, then it becomes Karma Yoga, which means your work becomes worship. So next, Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, how? How can somebody be detached from action which is performed by him? Whenever we do something, we become very attached to it. It's a fact of life. So here, Lord Shri Krishna, we debunk the fundamental error in our thinking, in our consciousness, where we think, I am the doer. And Krishna says, wait a second, you ain't the doer. There are three doers. So it's very easy for all of us to assume the mentality that I'm the controller, proprietor, the breadwinner. In reality, Krishna explains that for any activity which is performed, there are three doers: the Jiva, the Paramatma, and Prakriti. So Jiva, he desires. That's the only thing he can do. Paramatma listens to the desires, checks the karmic bank balance, karmic account. If karmic account allows him to give that credit, that Ishwar sanctions it and orders Prakriti. Our body is also made up of this earth, water, fire, ether, or the modes of matter nature. It's a gift of Prakriti. Then Ishwar sanctions the Prakriti, which means the body gets into an action, performs an action, or creates a facility for us for our desire to be fulfilled. And that is how any of our action gets fulfilled. So if we do any sinful action, we get punishment. If we go do any pious activity, we get rewarded. Is how Lord Shri Krishna have held us responsible, not Ishwar and Prakriti. So here I have a question for all of you: is who is the real culprit here? In other words, whom we should blame for our situation? Who is to be blamed? Is it our desires? Is it Ishvara because he sanctions it? Prakriti because she provides a facility? Or all of the above? So, all right, Gaurav Prabhu, you can manage it. I'll continue ahead. You can publish when they're done. So the answer is desires, our desires. So the idea is that we need to purify our desires. And how do we purify our desires? That is the process called as yoga. In other words, which is called as spirituality. Yoga spirituality is not about twisting our body, turning here and there. No, that's not it. The idea of yoga is to purify one's consciousness, which means the desires. So, Arjuna thought, how does a person who knows the secret of this, how an action is performed, who knows this knowledge of the three doers, how does such a person acts or behaves? And there we come to the second section or the third section of chapter 5, equal vision. The person who knows that I am not the doer, there is Ishvara, there is Prakriti, I am just one of the contributor. In other words, we are not an independent controller. We are dependent controller, dependent on the sanction of the Lord and the facility to be provided by Prakriti. Then we can perform our function of controllership. So how does such a person lives? So here the discussion is about the vision of spirituality. Why? Because the Paramatma resides in the heart of every living entity. So how does an advanced spiritualist look at everyone? So it is explained that the advanced spiritualist is able to see every life form, be it a plant, tree, humans, animals, birds, beasts, as temple of God. Thus, Krishna speaks 5:18, where he explains Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihasini Sri Chaiva Sapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. The vision of spiritualist or spirituality teaches us to offer or give utmost respect to every living being. Different bodies with different qualities are produced according to one's past actions. Yet each entity is of the same or a similar spiritual quality, that is Satchit Ananda. Thus, the spiritualist or the spirituality is not only free of racism, nationalism, ageism, or sexism, but also speciesism. You understand? Human species, plant species, it's even free of these kind of dualities. So when Arjuna heard it, he was amazed. I believe all of you would also be amazed that how fantastic a vision is. And if we could have this vision, how peaceful our life would be. And thus, Arjuna comes to a conclusion where he says to Lord, my dear Lord, chasing after material desires are useless and harmful because it takes us away from this spiritual vision. How many of you acknowledge this affirmation of Arjuna? Or how many of you echo with the Arjuna's opinion? Yes, no, what do you think? Let me also see what you all thinking. I could have had a poll here, but yeah, I missed out. So desires, although the sense gratification, or yeah, the material desires. So Lord Shri Krishna agrees with the thoughts of Arjuna and explains that how this desires for sense gratification is painful. Gehi samsparshaja bhuga dukha yoniya evate yadiyantavanta kaunteya nate shuramate buddha. Same principle is repeated already in chapter 3, that is lust, unfulfilled desires. And same point is described here, is that the sense gratification, which means the desire, adi antavanta kanteya, has a beginning and an end, which means it is never satisfied. And if you have it, there's always a fear of losing it. In other words, the process of fulfilling the desire is itself painful because we have to work very hard. And when it gets fulfilled, still there is no satisfaction because ye dil mange more. We always keep having this, I want more, I want more. The Krishna says this doesn't work out. So Arjuna said, my dear Lord, how do I find peace in this world? Lord Shri Krishna says, yes, how to find peace. I'll give you the peace formula. We come in this world with nothing, we leave this world with nothing. In this interim life, we claim to proprietorship and attachments to various objects which create insecurity, fear, and conflict. Change is a constant theme in this world, and our relationships are changing, environment is changing, the possessions are changing, and desires are also changing. To the extent we develop a sense of detachment, understanding Supreme Lord to be the proprietor and ourselves as simply caretakers, to that extent, we can experience a sense of peace within. Interestingly, it is this inner peace that brings about global peace. A community of individuals who are free from attachment, greed, envy, and covetousness is what makes the world a peaceful place to live. Bhoktaram yagna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram svidam sarvabhutanam jnanatvamam shantim rachati. So the peace formula is to understand Ishabhasam idam sarvam yat kinchyat jagatyam jagat, which means everything belongs to the Lord. He is the supreme CEO, supreme controller in joy and order. He is independent Swarat. He is independent controller, and we are dependent controller. To the degree we have this realization, to that degree we can find peace and happiness in this world. And that we conclude chapter 5 and comes to chapter 6, where at the end of chapter 5, Lord Shri Krishna had explained the process of Ashtanga Yoga to be able to control mind. Because unless we are able to control mind, we cannot perform any yoga. And that was one of the 3 aspects of Karma Yoga: control your mind and senses, then engage in your work without detachment, and remember, understand what is the aim of your work, is to purify. So in this particular chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Shri Krishna will speak at length about the process, conditions, requirements, and all that for Ashtanga Yoga, just to help us understand this is useless, that this Ashtanga Yoga does not work. Millions of people all over the world follows various limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, maybe Hatha Yoga, maybe Pranayama. But Lord Shri Krishna declares it that Arjuna, it is not feasible When Arjuna here will say that it's not feasible, what will be feasible for the people of Kali Yuga? It is just not possible. In this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna will conclude what is the best form of yoga that can help us live a progressive life. So the acronym for this chapter is EASY, interesting acronym, wherein we are about to discuss about the most difficult subject matter, where E stands for enemy or friend. So the question comes, this is the additional slide. Enemy or friend. In this section, the first section of chapter 6, Lord Shri Krishna describes or discusses the power of mind, where Krishna says an uncontrolled mind will agitate and misguide the soul, whereas the controlled mind, on the other hand, acts as a friend on our spiritual journey if it is controlled. When one controls and befriends the mind, one experiences tranquility and freedom from the duality. So Arjuna said, my dear Lord, how do I control the mind? Then Arjuna Krishna begins to speak Ashtanga Yoga. That's the second section of chapter 6. He says it's one of the Krishna explains Ashtanga Yoga to be one of the process of controlling mind, for which the very initial condition is lifelong celibacy, which unqualifies most of the population in today's world. Second condition, to live in the forest, that qualifies remaining celibates. And the third condition is to have a very strict regimen, very strict lifestyle, or regulated sleeping, eating, and whatnot, which makes it very difficult. And fourth, to have a very long life where you can perform this Ashtanga Yoga for a long time. The purification takes a long, long time. So when Arjuna heard this whole explanation about Ashtanga Yoga, do you know what Arjuna said? About Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Arjuna said, Lord, this is mission impossible because the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, very strong. I can control the will, but not the mind. Lord Shri Krishna said, Arjuna, I totally agree with you. It's not easy to control the mind, but I'll give you two-step formula to control the mind. How to control the mind? Through abhyas and through vairagya. Abhyasa, to follow the 9 process of the limbs of bhakti, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada, Sevanam. And Vairagya refers to don'ts, things which will distract us. Foremost of all, give up the 4 sinful activities: meat eating, intoxication, gambling, illicit sex, which makes us slaves of our mind. Such people cannot control their mind, they are ruled by their mind. So when Arjuna heard this, he became a little scared. He said, my dear Lord, I totally agree. It's a far easier approach, but to control mind is a great effort, requires a lot of determination. And then Arjuna thought, what would happen to somebody who takes to the process, but he fails to attain success in one lifetime? What happens to him? He should not be left in a no man's land. So Lord Shri Krishna says, don't worry. And that is the third section of chapter 6, where S stands for success or failure. Lord says, if we don't complete in one lifetime, we carry on in the next life from the same point where we left it. Thus, anyone who takes to the process of spiritual life is always victorious. The difference is the time. The factor is time. That's what separates. After short practice, if he falls away, he takes birth in an aristocratic family or higher planets. And after long practice, he takes birth in his next life in the families of devotees. And finally, Lord Shri Krishna concludes this whole 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita by emphatically telling Arjuna, through Arjuna, telling all of us, be a yogi. After summarizing this whole arduous process of dhyana or Ashtanga Yoga, the chapter concludes with a ray of hope, where Krishna reaffirms that the perfection of goal of all yoga system is to help individual become fully conscious of God at all times. While all yoga systems are certainly beneficial, the easiest, most efficient, and a progressive path is known as Bhakti Yoga. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenantaratmanah Shraddhavan bhajate yo mam same yuktatamo matah. And this is what Krishna tells all of us to be, and where Krishna defines who is the topmost yogi. The bhakti yogi is the topmost yogi, one who renders devotional service. The one who is most intimately united with me in yoga is the highest of all. And in this age, the primary practice of bhakti yoga is mantra meditation. Please repeat after me. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And through this simple process, sublime process of chanting of the holy names, any person from any background can attain spiritual perfection and experience all the benefits described in this chapter and elsewhere. And with this, the Karma Yoga section ends. However, there is very interesting word here is Shraddhavan Bhajate Yoma. With Shraddha, faith. And with that faith, not with that faith. Now in chapter 7, which we'll be discussing tomorrow, Lord Shri Krishna will explain, how to get the faith with which you can render service. Faith comes from knowledge. Now Lord Shri Krishna from 7th chapter to 12th chapter, which is the cream of Bhagavad Gita, will reveal the secrets about himself, his opulences, knowing which there won't be any doubts or contradictions. In fact, all the doubts and contradictions will reconcile when we understand the middle 6 chapters. And what could be the better time to understand and study this section than in the Purushottam Mas, the auspicious month wherein wherever we perform any spiritual activity which gets multiplied hundreds and thousands of times, and that is what an advantage for all of us. So with that, we pause here for our today's discussion, and tomorrow we'll begin another very important, the most important discussion is knowledge of the absolute truth. So we thank you all for your kind attention, for staying online with us, although I went 15-20 minutes ahead of time. So thank you all for joining us for today evening Bhagavad Gita session. I'll conclude here. Gaurav Prabhu, back to you in case if anyone has any questions or clarification. But before that, I want to make one last point. I believe those of you who have attended the previous sessions, I believe this discussion would have made some sense to you. And in case if you ended up attending it for the first time, Nitai Kaur Haribol. I don't know what would have happened. So do give me a feedback if this recap session was helpful for make it easy for you. If yes, then we'll do the recap of the future 2 sections of the Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. If not, then I'll just skip it and I'll continue in the series of chapters. So Gaurav Prabhu, back to you. You may ask if anyone has questions. And in case if you're comfortable, I would be happy to see who all are online. If you all can switch on your cameras.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, there are a few queries in the chat box. So maybe I'll first start with the query which we got from the YouTube viewer.
Yes.
So the name is Janani Naidu, and the query is from Bhagavad Gita chapter 4 verse number 13, which says caste system is unfair, but why everyone insults Karna by saying his caste?
So what is the last statement?
Caste system is unfair, but why everyone insult Karna by saying his caste?
Well, everyone insult Karna by saying it's like Suta Putra in that sense. I would say it's Karna to be blamed because he acted very arrogantly and proudly. And if you read Bhagavad Mahabharata, Bhishma Pitama himself would chastise Karna many times because of his arrogance, because of his boastful nature, where he every time would boast about his prowess and how he's a great fighter than Arjuna, although the history of Karna had proved that many times he had been defeated in the past, either by Arjuna or even by Drupad. where after Dronacharya had completed the training of Pandavas and Kauravas, and Kauravas had gone as a matter of Guru Dakshina to defeat Drupad. That time Karna had also accompanied Kauravas, and Kauravas got defeated. And then Arjuna Bhima went single-handedly and brought Drupad. So like that, the history speaks about it. So Arjuna or Karna would always boast about himself. So that's a way of Kshatriya way of dealing, where Kshatriya would speak a little harshly. So they'll tell him, you Sut Putra. In other words, it's a way of saying you nonsense, you fool. So like this is the Kshatriya slang language, how to insult each other. Okay, so I can't say much more on that. All right, Karpu. Karpu, if you're gonna read out the message, if you're gonna read out the questions from the chat, so I mean, maybe the person is here, then it's good to answer that. Or else we can take someone else's
Yes,
question.
Prabhu. So
Yes.
yeah, that's also one query from YouTube, so I took it first.
Thank you.
Next query is from Tarun Prabhu. Tarun Prabhu, if you are there, maybe you can.
Yeah, I can see Tarun. Yes.
Tarun
Go ahead,
Prabhu.
Karpu.
Yeah. So his query is: Dhritarashtra was such an evil person, still he could listen Gita from Lord through Sanjay. Why Lord Krishna gave him this Amrit Gyan?
I mean, why shouldn't? It's the same point. Does the sun make a discrimination in the sunlight? The sunlight falls on the house of the evil person and of the pious. So Krishna is not affected. Lord's mercy. See, you're talking about the Gyan. That same Krishna is present in the form, in the body of Paramatma, is a body of Dhritarashtra as Paramatma. So before giving the knowledge, Paramatma should have left his body. Na? If Paramatma would have left, Dhritarashtra would have died long ago. That. So see, Krishna says, Samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshti asti na priya. I am equal to all. I am impartial. All right. And that's the reason Krishna agreed to Duryodhana and Arjuna both. And he decided, either you choose me or you choose my army. And that was a big threat for the Pandavas, the whole Narayani Sena being with Kauravas. So that's the point. So don't the Lord is always impartial. He loves us despite of who we are still. Just like a loving father. Mother and father cannot stop loving their kids ever. Garaprabhu, next please.
Yes. Next query is from Santosh Prabhu. He's asked. He wanted to know the difference between Karma Yoga, which is in chapter 3, and Karma Yoga action in Krishna consciousness, chapter 5.
It's the same thing. Just Lord Arjuna have not understood, thus Krishna have further elaborated on the concept. Next, Karma.
Next is from Upma Mataji. Her query is related to the prescribed duties in today's era when we are not following Varnashrama.
Okay.
What are our prescribed duties in
current? If that's your question about your prescribed duty. So the first thing that what we need to do right now is whatever situation we are in. We are a housewife, we are a mother, we are a daughter, or whatever we are in whichever role, we should perform that role properly and simultaneously take to the process of Bhakti Yoga. You call it Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. So because that's the reason Bhakti Yoga is said to be the easiest process for today, day and time, because all this prescribed duties, Varnashrama, everything has been collapsed. So to practice Bhakti Yoga, it does not matter which part of Varna or Ashram you are. You can be whoever you are, a child or an adult or an old man or a woman or whoever in anyone in the occupation. You can be the worst of the person, you can be the best of the person, you can be the most intelligent, the most foolish. Bhakti Yoga is so simple because to chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra doesn't require any intelligence, doesn't require any involvement of mind. We have to just utter and hear. And there cannot be anything as simple as this.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I asked this
Yes.
question because like few days back there were Fitr Paksh were going on, right? So
Okay.
there is a specific thing that only boys can do those karma for their pitars,
Yes.
right? But if
Yes.
somehow like I'm the only, if I am the only one, maybe like because my girl, I have only two girls, right? So isn't it giving much more importance to boys? That is why I've asked my prefer my prescribed duty.
Okay, I mean, that's a different question. What you're asking right now is quite different than that. So your question is, boys is given more preference than over girl. That's what you're asking now. Is that so?
Is this so?
Well, just like you go to the market to buy a car, you have different models available, right?
True.
One model would have some features, other model will have another feature. Some model have more feature than the other model, isn't it? It's just a different models. Similarly, we have 8.4 million species, which are just like that, different models. And each model have different features, different utilities. So if you see from this perspective, you can understand that yes, there are certain advantages which are given to a male form, but it doesn't mean the female form doesn't have advantage. If there is no female form, there is no meaning to a male form. You're getting the point now?
Yeah,
If there
I'm
is no
getting the
female
point.
form, if there is no female form, there is no meaning to a male form, because female is a mother. It's the same mother who brings forward the man and the woman. So the female have that privilege which the man doesn't have. Simultaneously, man have certain features which a woman doesn't have. So these are just different models. These are different creations in this, the different models in this creation. So that's it. That's all. So you don't have to see something as biased or favor given to someone or someone not. This is what has been decided for different bodies.
Yeah, but the thing is, ki the person, a woman can give birth. This is a biological feature, right? But if
Who
she will
decided that
be
biological? Who decided the biological feature?
no, they're like because she's having those body organs, right? I'm talking
Decided
about
that biological? Who decided that biological feature?
yeah, definitely Krishna.
The Lord.
Yeah,
That's
but
it.
I'm asking the if she is not able to perform those yagna of Pitar Paksh or of anything, so this is so decided by the human being or
No,
not?
the Vedic culture, Vedic scripture talks about it.
Hmm.
What can be done? So it is the son. In absence of the son, the grandson. You know, they will perform this. I'm not aware of the details of Pitha Praksha, but at least the final rites have to be performed by the son or the grandson. And yes, Pitha Praksha also, the dan is done by the son only. So that's what I'm saying. In Kali Yuga, for you to do your Pitha Praksha, the best is you can always offer charity. You can always offer food that is offered to the Lord, to your forefather. That can always be done. So you don't have to go into the technicalities of the culture, which we have quite a lot lost it. Because you may be following Pitr Paksha, but you have no details of it available. You're
True.
just doing maybe because what your neighbor is doing, what your mother-in-law told you, what your mother have told you. So now a lot of things that we do is hearsay. Hearsay means suna sunaya. So don't get too much caught up, disturbed by it. Whatever you have to do, just do the needful, but follow the things that Bhagavad Gita is teaching you now. And be assured that you are protected and gain knowledge about it. And you'll be all fine. Okay? Gaurav?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Uh,
Prabhuji, I have a question.
yes, Jagannath will come. I'm just going sequentially, so your query will also be there. So next query is from Sumit Prabhu. Sumit Prabhu, you're there? You can switch on your video.
Let me sign out. Gaurav next.
Okay. Then we'll have next is no, too many queries. Okay. Mm, let's scroll down a bit. Yes. Now it's Jagannath's query. Query is from verse number 5.29. He said, I am the supreme enjoyer. No one else is enjoyer like me. So there is a man who is enjoying the life. He's sitting in a window and enjoying and drinking milk. Now Lord said,
I didn't expect you were gonna say milk. He's
Prabhuji,
a man sitting on a
Prabhuji,
window. I thought something else
Prabhuji,
drinking.
It's Jagannath. So Jagannath, you can
Jagannath,
ask.
Jagannath Gaurav is reading your question. Let him continue. Yes, Gaurav, go ahead.
So he's sitting on a window and enjoying and drinking milk. Now Lord said that no one enjoys in this world. Now, did this man is enjoying? He is not at
Yes,
all a devotee. He has offered the things
correct,
to the.
correct. He's enjoying because that enjoyment nature is the part of the soul. Satchit Ananda. Ananda means bliss. What Krishna means, I am the supreme enjoyer, means his enjoyment is never disturbed. Our enjoyment is temporary. That's the meaning of it. Okay? Powerful. Next.
Yes, Prabhu. Essentially, okay. Right. Oh,
Maybe
we have
somebody, I guess we can, somebody
please.
is there, they can speak up directly now because many people might have left.
Yeah,
You can note down the questions. I
I've
can
logged out.
respond to it later on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. One Prabhu is from YouTube who is asking a query. His query is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse number 12. He's asking, who is Parameshwar? If Lord Krishna is Parameshwar, then how does one relate to other gods like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Ganesha, and others?
That will be discussion of tomorrow's session, chapter 7. They will be talking about it. Relationship between Krishna and Devtas.
Yeah.
We'll answer that tomorrow.
Yes, and also related to Lord Rama also. So everything comes over there, right?
Okay, okay, okay.
Yes. Okay, Prabhu. I have one question. Yeah. Neil Madhav Prabhu. Sometimes we get angry because of one person. So how can we remove that anger towards that person?
One way is to pray to the Lord to give us the ability to forgive. Second is to also understand and realize the mistakes that we have done in our relationship with the Lord and how Lord, despite of our betrayals, life after life, have forgiven us, tolerated us, and has still continued to provide for us. If Lord can reciprocate towards us in such a loving way, then why can't I do a part of it? So these two things, if we remember and if we contemplate on it, then it'll help you to overcome this feeling of anger. Of course, it depends on the context because of what you have got angry, and that has to be also considered. But these two principles should be able to help you to guide you in a certain direction. All right, Gaurav Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. One last query. Okay, from Sujata Mataji. If someone does not perform Pitra Paksh, what will be the consequences? And if parents are alive, we should not perform. Definitely not. So, what are the consequences if we does not perform the Pitta Paksh?
The idea of this is to serve our ancestors, and when we don't do that, they become offended. As I said before, also the whole idea is we are dependent controller. Third chapter Bhagavad Gita talks about the yajna system, where the dependency is being described, where we depend on the gifts of the devtas like rain, crops, sunlight, and whatnot. And in return, it is expected that we also offer gratitude. Similarly, we are rini to different entities like Guru, like Father, forefathers, the sages or the Brahmanas, and to living entities in general. So that's the reason we have to perform a lot of activities in terms of pleasing, in terms of reciprocating with what all we have received. It is unfortunate today we are not taught like that. We are forced to forget all this thing by keeping our mind engaged in sense gratification. However, if we just spend a time and think about it, I mean, we are always been provided. Every time we have been provided, you know. where is the time where we are actually able to contribute to the society or contribute or serve to our parents? A very limited of that. But more and large, we have been always provided and served with so many other facilities which are given to us, either by the Lord Himself directly or through the nature or through the agents of the nature, like that. So there is a system created of that, cultivating gratitude and reciprocating. So it's very important to do so. However, in case if you have taken to the process of bhakti yoga, where you are firmly and properly situated, then in that case, even if you skip the rituals or the practices of these, then it will not affect you much. And that we'll see in the chapters ahead where Krishna says, those who take my shelter, hey Arjuna, declare, Kantiha Pratijanini Name Bhaktya Pranashyati. They're never destroyed. If we take shelter of Guru Sadhu Shastra properly, then we are protected. We can be forgiven for our ignorance because we don't know everything today because of lack of education. But in other words, but if somebody still doesn't do it, is not even taking to Krishna consciousness, there would be anxieties, stresses, there could be some casualties also. Those things happen. Now, when things happen, we don't know what's the cause, what's the reason, because this kind of untoward events are part of everyone's life today. Who is here today can say that he has no mental stress or anxiety. Now, stress and anxiety have become so much part of our life. If for a day I don't have a stress or anxiety, there seems like an emptiness. Yes or no? अरे आज कैसे दिन गया? कोई चिंता ही नहीं रही. It's a kind of a surprise today's time. So that's what our life has become. Okay, Gaurav Prabhu.
Prabhuji, can I ask one more question, please?
Yes, I'll just take one last from Gaurav Prabhu. He can decide that. If anyone else who have not asked a question they want to ask, then otherwise we can go to Madan.
Yeah, there are two questions. One is from Mukesh Prabhu. Which verse in Bhagavad Gita talks about 4 steps of yoga ladder and the hierarchy?
That's mentioned in the 6th chapter. I'll just send it to you about this.
Okay.
Mukesh, I have his WhatsApp. You can WhatsApp me, Mukesh, and I'll send you this. Or I can just find it right now. Go ahead, Gaurav Prabhu, with the next.
The next query is from Shweta Mataji. She raised her hand. So Shweta Mataji, you can unmute and ask your query if you have, because I see your hand raised from a long time.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Actually, my question is why the jiva is called conditioned soul, Prabhu?
Because he's influenced by the modes of material nature. To explain you the conditioning, it's a way of saying, how do I explain this? I'll explain in the context of English only because condition word is used in that way. Conditioning refers to one particular pattern of thinking. Conditioned, I'm conditioned to think in that way. So similarly, the jiva is conditioned to think that he is a body, but not a spirit soul. That's the reason it's called conditioned jiva soul. He is conditioned by the modes of material nature. So what is unconditioned? Unconditioned jiva soul, where there are no conditions imposed on him by the material nature. Conditioned jiva soul, he's always under the influence of mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Conditioned jiva soul is always under the influence of laws of karma. Conditioned jiva soul, is always conditioned in terms of reincarnation, birth, death, old age, and disease. He has so many impositions on him. However, the unconditioned is actually a state of freedom where it is not under the influences of the external energy or the prakriti. So that's the meaning.
Prabhu, I have one more question, Prabhu. How and when the soul enters into another body? How and when?
How and when enters?
Yeah,
Can
to
you be-
another body.
How
The
and
soul.
when?
How and when the soul enters.
Yeah, for that there are different descriptions given. The reference for that would be Garuda Puran. If somebody is very keen to study post-life, what happens after a person dies, and then how is it taken to the next body. That all thing is described in Garuda Puran. I cannot tell you something very precisely because there are different versions of what happens. Because neither Bhagavad Gita speaks in details about it, nor Srimad Bhagavatam, any of the scriptures which we regularly refer to. Garuda Puran is there primarily, which is referred for the subject matter, but there are several opinions on it. It is said just when the person dies, the soul is immediately taken away, and it travels through 13 or 14 days of journey to go to the abode of Yama. Then is given the sentence, announced, what the verdict. Other thing is given that the Atma is there for 11 days in the mortal world until the body is burnt. The idea of burning the body is so that the soul can now leave finally. Because the mind, the subtle body, is so attached to the body until the body. Why we burn body in our Vedic culture? Because once the body is burnt, fire is a purifying agent. Fire is a purifying. Fire sacrifices, you know that, right? So that's considered sacred. So when you burn the body in fire, then the bonds of that attachment of the subtle body with the gross body breaks. Similarly, for the self-realized souls, we never burn the body. We bury them. Why? Because they are anyways totally detached from their body. So their body becomes spiritualized. So their body is not burnt, but it's buried. And there we make a samadhi. So there are different descriptions are given. So I'm no expert in this thing, but I don't want to quote anything which is not yet very authentic. But these are some ideas about it. Right? But you are definitely encouraged to explore Garuda Puran. But be careful, it's a little scary story. Huh? It's like a horror movie. What goes on after that? The 14 days journey you will read, you'll have nightmares otherwise for some time. All right.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Prabhu, there is no further query in the chat box. So if there is anyone else who has any query,
If there is time, then.
Yes, go ahead, Mother. Yes, please.
Prabhuji, look, I'm saying, like you said, being humble, right? So, in today's era, what happens if you are humble? People try to take advantage of that. Why I'm saying, see, I am an ophthalmologist. So, some people say I don't have any attitude of a doctor, and they are very happy about it. Some take it in a very good way, but majority of the people don't take it a good way. They think like, yeah, she can be easily something like that. I cannot make it. So how
Correct.
to avoid this situation?
Being humble doesn't mean being foolish. All right. So you have to live in this world. We have discussed this on the Thursday question answer session also. You have to be part of this world. So if you're living amongst people who are arrogant, maybe out of ignorance, or proud out of ignorance. So if you act humble in front of them, jivo jivasya jivanam, that's the principle. The weaker class becomes a sustenance for a stronger class. Then you become a victim there. So you have to have an intelligence how to behave, how to act, how to protect yourself. Now, the first principle of life is self-preservation. So you have to protect yourself. That intelligence you have to cultivate. You cannot just blindly act. So just like Arjuna, was Arjuna humble while fighting in the war? Well, Arjuna is humble while discussing Bhagavad Gita. If
True.
Arjuna was humble, how an humble person can shoot an arrow? It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying while fighting is proud or arrogant, but everything has an application. So that requires intelligence. That's okay.
Yeah. Thank you,
And
Prabhuji.
that's our prerogative to cultivate that intelligence by studying scriptures. How do you get that intelligence? By studying scriptures. I mean, I wish and I hope everyone can study Ramayana and Mahabharata once they're alive. Ramayana and Mahabharata, particularly Mahabharata, tells you how to live in this world.
Ramayana, you saying the Sanskrit version or Ramcharitmanas?
I'm focusing on Mahabharata, not Ramayana. Ramayana has a lot of devotional aspect. Mahabharata is one literature primarily that tells you how to live in this world. Because you have a classic characters of Pandavas who devotees of the Lord, yet they're diplomats, they're politicians, they're administrators. So yes, but this used to be part of our education system when Gurukul was there. So every man, every child would be educated in the knowledge of Mahabharata. So then they would not be easily cheated by people. Because of the British style education system, we have lost a sense of social intercourse, which means how to interact in the society and how to protect ourselves. We lost that skill set. So we need to cultivate through the process of reading and hearing of Shastras. Fine. So thank you. Is there anything else? Anyone else have anything?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Nothing in the chat, Prabhu.
All right. Thank you all. Garpo, you can just save the chat yet still, so I can at least take a look at it later on. So
Yes, Prabhu.
thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Krishna willing, we'll meet tomorrow evening for our discussion on the Bhakti Yoga section, starting with chapter 7. Hare Krishna, everyone. Hare Krishna, Jitin, nice to see you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. All right, thank you all. It's been late for
Hare
all of you
Krishna,
now.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Sudhirji. Yes, Hare Krishna.
Today's class was good. Very, very good. It was reviving.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Oh, Hare Krishna, Raji.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, nice to see you, some of you. Okay, great. Thank you, Hare Krishna. I'll take your leave now, and we'll meet tomorrow evening. Hare Krishna.